Hello everyone, I'm Johnny Delgado, and today we're going to talk about functions. Functions are probably one of the most useful components in all of programming. They let us be lazy, which is awesome. Functions at their core let us do the same thing many times without having to write out the exact same lines of code over and over and over again. And I don't know about you, but to me that sounds like a great time saver. So, what is a function? Functions are like input output machines. They are the little black box that something goes into it, something pops out. We don't necessarily need to know what happens inside to use a function. And you've already been using functions quite a bit if you've done any kind of programming so far. If you say system.out.println, the println at the end is a function, and we can tell because it has those little parentheses at the end. That is our function signature, if you will. Well, not technically the signature, but in a colloquial sense, that's the little tag we can see and think, oh, that's a function. That brings us into our next point of the anatomy of a function. And there actually is a part called the signature that we're going to talk about right now. So instead of going through all of these and describing what they are without you having any idea what I'm talking about, we're going to go ahead and declare a function in the same way that we declared a variable. We are going to say, this is a function, here's what its name is, and here's what it's going to do. So to make a function in Java, we say public static. You've probably seen this before. Don't worry so much about the word static. You'll learn what that is and what that's about in more advanced places. Public is the scope. That means we can call it from within this file or from a different file. And together, these are referred to as the signature sometimes. Then we have a return type. For this function, because I want to declare a function to introduce myself, you might have this as an email signature or at the beginning of an introduction to someone. It's a function without an input and without an output. We just want to print out a, hi, my name is Johnny, and I'll say something about myself. So we'll say public static void. Void is your return type. That is what says, hey, this function is not going to spit anything out. That's all that means. We'll talk about what happens when you do want an output in a minute. So then we give it a name. So we're going to say, introduction. And see, okay, I didn't even think about it, but see how I wrote the name and I immediately put parentheses? That is because it is so ingrained in my brain. When I'm making a function, I need to write parentheses. But the word introduction here, that is our name. That is the name of the function. Parameters are what go inside these parentheses. They are the input to the function. And just like how we don't have an output for this function, we also don't have an input. I just want to make a function that will repeatedly print out some kind of Johnny Delgado introduction. I don't want to actually do my email signature and give everyone my personal phone number, because then people will be calling me asking me for programming help. So instead, I'm going to say system.out.println and say, hello, my name is Johnny, and I'll have another print statement to say a little something about myself. Welcome to CS class, and I'll throw in something about myself. I like ice cream. There we go. So now we will run that, but nothing happens. Now, hey, Johnny, what's going on? I know you're asking. We've declared the function, but remember how when we talked about variables, we had to declare the variable and then get it later on. This is our declaration. We've declared it. and we have to put the body of the function within these curly braces here, and that is the body of the function, the meat and potatoes, what the function is actually doing. But then we have to, in the same way that we get a variable, we have to call a function. So here I'm actually going to just call introduction like this. When we have a class in Java like this, our main method is what's going to do the running. When we run the file, the main method will run. And that's why we put introduction here. So we say in the main method, what I want you to do is run the introduction function. And so there we go. And now we have my introduction. Now, the nice thing about functions is we can call them repeatedly without having to do much more work at all. So it's hard to see like this. But now it's printing out my introduction over and over and over again. And that's awesome because I only had to write that out once. Now this is probably a bit extreme. So let's move on. I mentioned inputs and outputs. Let's have an example of a function that has an input but doesn't have an output. So we're starting small. So once again, we would say public static, no output. So we would still say void. Let's say product, because I want to make a function, to teach kids math, something that when we give it to integers, it's going to spit out not only the product, but it's going to describe the process as well. And because we have two integers as our input, I would say int x, that's our first input, an integer named x, and int y. So this is saying there are two inputs, two parameters in our function. One of them is an integer named x, the other is an integer named y. And you might be thinking right here, oh, Johnny, we say int, am I declaring a variable? Yes. Here, you're actually declaring two variables. So I can just call them in here and say int product equals x times y. And then I can go and say system.out.println, and then I'll add a string that says the product of whatever x is and whatever y is, and then print that product. So here we've created a very long string that instead of just spitting out the number, will tell the user, the student, the product of the number x that you gave me and the number y that you gave me is variable product. And we've set variable product equal to x times y. So let's go ahead and try to run this. Instead of my introduction, we're going to go ahead and let's say 2 and 3 to keep things simple. And run, and it says the product of 2 and 3 is 6. And we can do this a lot. This probably makes more sense for more examples. So we can say, 3 and 3, we can say 123 times 75, which I don't know the answer to off the top of my head. If any of you do, pause the video and try to guess. And sure enough, it can give you have a multiplication calculator for your students. And now, as a final example, we're going to go ahead and modify this function just a little bit. We're going to, I'll use the same one to not complicate things. I'm just going to paste what we have here. Because I want to do the same thing, except I want it to return the value as well, I'm going to change the public static void to a public static int. This is my return type. This says whatever happens in this function, it is somehow going to spit out some integer. And to spit that out, we would say return product. And so maybe up here, so let's simplify these things up here. Just running this functions the exact same way. Nothing changes. This looks identical. However, if we want to maybe get rid of, no, let's keep that line and just try to print it twice. So what I'm doing here is saying, oh, I need to actually write the name of the function. That would be useful. So what's going to happen? Take a second to pause the video and try to guess what's going to happen here. In the main method, I'm saying system.out.println, and then I'm running the function. I'm actually running the function within the print statement. Now, how is that possible, you may ask? Well, for this context, this is going to act as a variable. It's going to act as whatever value thing gets spit out by the function. In the same way that I could put a variable in here, I could also put like a single number in here. I can put a function in a print statement. So if you have your guess, let's see what happens and then talk about it. Okay, so first, it's going to go to this line and it's going to say, okay, I'm going to print what's in here. Oh, but what's in here is a function. Stop. I'm going to go down, run the function, and within that function, there is a print statement. And that's why this line gets printed in the console. Then I'm going to return the product. And because the product of 2 and 3 is 6, and I return the product, it's going to send the number 6 all the way back up here. So this basically just gets replaced with the number 6. These two things are equivalent in this context, but hopefully you can see why it's more useful to have a multiplication function than just hard coding every single number if you're doing something like a multiplication table. And then it's going to print that number. So because here you would just print the number 6, here it's actually printing what we say in the function and then the number 6. So to recap, functions are repeatable elements of code that you can use over and over again, and they have certain parts to them. The signature, which consists of the scope and the word static for now. We'll deal with that later. The name of the function, the return type, which can be void or int or string or whatever, that is the output of that function. The name, which can be whatever name you make up. Parameters, which go within the parentheses at the end of the function, and if they represent the input to that function. And if there is no input, you still have to write the parentheses, you just leave them blank. And then the body, which is what goes inside these curly brackets, curly braces, and that's going to be the code that runs whenever you call the function. And finally, to call the function, you write the function's name, put your parentheses, and if there are any inputs or parameters to that function, you write them in there, separated by commas if there is more than one, and finish it off with a semicolon, as always. So, I hope you learned something. Sorry that video was a bit long, but yeah, I hope you had a good time, and see you in the next one.